We are now live on Facebook. With
Okay.
Laura Eisenhower. Welcome, Laura.
Hey, Alfred.
We are now live on Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can watch it there, and we had it is now 2:29. I actually put I readjusted the announcement of the webinar or the program on Zoom, so it was at 2:30. So it took us 30 minutes to get beyond the block, and we were remarking, as we were journeying through, because we had to go to Zoom support, that this was a bit symbolic of humanity's struggle to get out of this matrix, which is the reptilian Draco-Anunnaki elite matrix that we're in, because it became obvious. I mean, it was so obvious. We didn't comment it with Allie, the employee, because it would have kind of put her on the spot,
Yeah.
But it was so obvious that there was some outside force that was not allowing us and allowing Laura to assume audio and video, to assume like direct entrance into a full, presence. So, but as you said, Laura, you just bust through. You're unstoppable. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Alfred.
Oh yeah, and I just wanted to say, by way of introduction, because I was looking at some of your notes today, and it's clear that you are much more schooled in areas of this and have much more insight than I do. And also you are genetically and by bloodline connected to this issue through your great-grandfather, President Dwight Eisenhower, who actually signed one of the treaties, the Greada Treaty, that we'll be talking about today. And the title of today's program, let me get it, is Dissolving the Draco-Anunnaki Reptilian and Orion-Grey Matrix Within and Without. And that came together, at least in my mind, when I reached out and made the invitation, because a friend of mine, Frances Alden, here from Vancouver, she lives down in White Rock, just at the American border. And she posted one of your posts on Facebook that says the reptilian agenda and the alliance was formed between the two main controller groups on the planet. It's like the good and bad bacteria in our gut. It's like the immune system and its need to constantly strengthen itself in the face of viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungus, and so on, and our aura needing to be more and more shielded and protected. And my own thing, we have the reptilian, the mammalian, and the neocortex brain. And then in parallel with a number of researchers here, we had been working on the project called Abrogate This, to abrogate the Greada Treaty and some of the other treaties. So those two things came together in my mind, and I reached out to you and I said, Laura Eisenhower, are you the Princess Di of the ET treaties? Remember how Princess Di with the landmines went out and got the landmine treaty conference really on the world map.
Mm-hmm.
And they got landmines banned, and those were blowing off children's limbs. So because your great-grandfather signed this treaty, in a way, you have the public visibility to make this an issue and to bring it to public consciousness, and you have the spiritual and DNA connection to raise it as a moral issue. And, you know, for whatever reason, President Trump has the legal ability to abrogate it. And he's talked about abrogating the NAFTA treaty, abrogating the climate treaty. I mean, he's like Mr. Abrogate whatever, right? So abrogate this, abrogate the Greada treaty and end criminal matrix on Earth, abrogate the Tau 9 treaty. Now, you were saying to me earlier, you said, oh, but the Emerald Covenant Treaty is different. So I'm just kind of painting a broad stroke here because you really have an inner blueprint and you've been talking about all these issues and thinking about them for so long. So let me quiet myself and turn it over to you. Welcome, Laura.
Well, thank you so much, Alfred. Yeah, I mean, I do feel a huge responsibility coming in to this family line to take it, you know, to the next level. We have to figure that during that particular time in history, during his administration, it was very difficult to really understand the larger picture that we're now getting more clarity on in regards to the nature of these treaties. I mean, as we know, or at least a lot of people know, if they've done research on this subject, that Eisenhower had contact with at least, you know, 3 different occasions with numerous different races, ending in the presence of Valiant 4, and they put him on VIP status in the Pentagon for 3 years in order to assist him in helping the human race to become sovereign, which was always the intention. I mean, that's why he fought the war and tried to stop the Nazis. But, you know, we're dealing with these 3-letter organizations that were put into place by Truman, with him unknowingly being aware of what Project Paperclip was all about and what that was, you know, going to begin. Gosh, I'm sorry if I'm not that articulate. Today's been just so much going on with just all this sort of information. But basically, Project Paperclip was put into place, which started this massive infiltration, including this flyover of UFOs over the Capitol, which was in 1952, 2 years before the actual treaty got signed. And not everybody feels that Eisenhower was actually behind the agreement. Alex Collier, who's a contactee of the Andromedan beings, mentioned that the Moon Unit section of the NSA was behind the treaty. But anybody that considers himself a whistleblower to that particular treaty also mentions that Eisenhower did want to bring it out to the public. They weren't in agreement so much about the Nordics because, I mean, there's a mixed bag when we look at the Nordics because they were aligned with, you know, the Nazi mentality. I mean, they were a huge part of that racial purity and some of those secret societies that ended up going into the Draco hands. And so when we look at these 2 controller groups, we have the Sons of Belial and we have the Black Suns. The Black Suns are primarily Draco-Reptilian, and the Sons of Belial are the factions of the Anunnaki that are fallen, and they ended up creating a federation together to pretty much share in the spoils of war so that they weren't competing agendas anymore, but they would become, you know, aligned to you know, make sure that there was no real room for us to claim victory. And this particular federation is still kind of in the works, but they haven't been able to use enough of our energy. They have not been able to harvest enough of our energies to be successful in completely kind of taking over the Earth grids, which is basically what they mainly target because it has a direct link to our DNA. When we look at the Emerald Covenant, the Emerald Order is connected to the Orphan consciousness, the Indigo races, and the Crystal Children, and they're part of the Grail lines and the Angelic lines that came to Earth to raise the frequency. And they made agreements with the Niburian Pleiadians and the Nephilim and the Anu Elohim councils, basically the Pleiadian Star League, to stop them from intentionally hijacking all of humanity into the Anunnaki evolution. And so the Elohai, which is the highest level of the Elohim, you know, have been trying to do this. And I would say that they represent the Emerald Order. And the whole idea is that these fallen races would be sort of called out, knowing that there's a detriment to even their ability to progress in their agendas, and that the best thing that they could do was create a treaty. And that treaty is called the Emerald Covenant, and it relates to helping us as a humanity reach our 12-strand DNA potential, and it's to help us to get the energy of the grids back in the hands of the power of Gaia. And in this window period that we're in, this is when the hosting of the Melchizedek lines, which have basically fallen into patriarchy, have moved into the hosting of the goddess energy, aligned with what's called crystal star hosting and the aurora, which are from Andromeda galaxy, which is all about weaving it back together during this time, which is all already happening on a cosmic level. So because we've gotten this far and we've stayed sort of ahead of the game, staying informed, that's been enough to keep this total enslavement from taking place. And so new treaties had to come in, which were basically a surrender from some of the darker races. And that is the Emerald Covenant Treaty. And that almost helps to nullify things like the Greada Treaty. But I am in absolute agreement that it needs to be symbolized with a statement from Trump and an acknowledgement from our governments that we are no longer making any deals. Now, again, in Eisenhower administration, it was considered a surrender. These treaties actually originated with Churchill, Winston Churchill, Aleister Crowley, and Hitler. And this goes way into like Atlantean times, and agreements that Aleister Crowley made to be sort of the front runner of, pushing these agendas and creating that black magic, and the whole idea of what it would take to become an immortal being through pedophilia, sex slavery, and these certain programs that basically siphon Kundalini and give the power to these individuals that don't know how to get power any other way. So I don't want to, talk too much until, I'm sure you want to jump in with some questions, and I know that some of this can go over people's heads. So I'll just sort of stop there.
Well, that is the most crystallized and concise and clear expression of multidimensional, universal, and galactic history, and omniversal history that I've ever encountered. I mean, I really have to say that I just am totally awed. And so would you actually, I mean, this is like a question that I've really wrestled with, really asking you, but would you seriously, as a presidential great-granddaughter, seriously consider bringing this to the attention of the current president of the United States, who seems to be a maverick? I mean, it's kind of hard to figure this person out, but he seems like programmed to abrogate. And, but it seems like if one points that president in the right direction, he might sort of go in the right direction or might not. So would you consider, because there are all these other competing interests, but he listens to Putin, and some people say that Putin, is tuned into the right, like the right input. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do anything it takes. If you'll give me the time of day, I would definitely have a lot to share. And I feel it's incredibly important. He needs all this information. All this has been kept hidden from us. That's why people have such a hard time with it. But we have to recognize that we're multidimensional beings, and we're really dealing with, it really does come down to service to self, service to others. And we can get lost in all the names, all these different kind of hybrid groups. Some who actually feel abandoned and are just really angry at the overlords or the ring leaders of these agendas, because they haven't been really assisted. They've been sort of left to figure it out for themselves, and sort of seen as a lesser entity because they've been hybridized, because there's so much concern about racial purity. But then other ones they're using specifically because they hold the genetics of the reptilian, and through trauma-based mind control, they can work with those genetics within that person, which cancels out the other high level DNA expression that they have, which is called Orifim, which connects to the founder races. And so when we look at the Emerald Covenant, it actually connects to the guardian races and those that are born with this activated are doing this work right now on the planet, and they've been tasked with doing this work. And this is what you and me do, and this is what so many others are doing. Even if we don't have the full picture, we're doing it. You know, we get bits and pieces along the way, but it's through the individuals that are able to handle this and bring it forward that are creating, you know, these activations that are directly impacting the Earth grids. What it basically does is it neutralizes the ability of these dark technologies to work, because if they have nothing to siphon or they don't have enough harvested energy to work with, then there's not a whole lot they can do. And I really do feel they expected us to be way more enslaved by now. This is, I mean, all these allegations coming out in 2017, they thought New World Order would have really been established around the time of 2012, which was when the Mars recruitment wanted to make sure I was off planet by that date. So, you know, we all share in this inheritance, and at the same time, the whole of humanity has access to it. So it's not about hierarchy. It's just about allowing the activations to happen, because every single person has that blueprint. And the tree of life was pulled down to a 10-strand spherical model, sacred geometry model, which is draconian DNA, 10-strand. And then the negative factions of the Anunnaki have limited themselves to 11-strand to keep us from that 12-strand activation that brings us into the 13th gate, which is basically what this planetary body was formed from, or the intention of it reaching fruition as an ascension planet. So once we get the 12, we're able to complete. Even if we don't embody it on a physical level, as long as we have it in our consciousness, that process has already begun. And so the 11th gate, Stargate, has been infiltrated with dark alien machinery, and so has the 10th gate, which both represent the DNA strands. And that's to keep us from achieving the 12th strand. That's why they reversed all the sacred geometries and changed the numbering and scrambled the DNA coding and started to push them through programmings in our society. And then with the ET treaties, they've been given access to abductions, but those things were already out of control long before Eisenhower ever stepped into office. And it's just something that hasn't really been able to be fully remedied until this window period, which is 2000 to 2017. And that's why in the last couple months of 2017, everything is coming to light in such a huge way, because we've really been successful.
Right. Well, now I'm just kind of questioning, because I have very little background here, and I may ask some sensitive questions, and just tell me yes or no. Because you know, I grew up in an era, as a matter of fact, when I was a junior in boarding school in Washington, D.C., our class went to meet with the Secretary of Labor of your great-grandfather, and I was among, you know, this little group that went, and, you know, so we questioned him back and forth about right-to-work laws and stuff like that. And afterward, he sent down commendations that he was very impressed with me and the way that I questioned him. So I always had I grew up feeling that I had a special relationship, because, you know, the Secretary of Labor of Dwight Eisenhower had listened to me. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, this was like, because when you're when you're that age, you're an impressionable person. So I'm just going to start asking. And also because I grew up, in other words, I knew about your mother before I knew about you, and I met you because your mother was a figure in the circles that I sort of came up in world public order circles, space preservation, and all that kind of thing, and your great and your grandfather and great uncles and all of that. That was the, you know, my generation kind of grew up in them as progressive people. You see what I'm saying? So I'm just, oh, well, they can, you know. So do you think that from a DNA perspective, because I don't know anything about the inner workings of your family and et cetera, that they would be sympathetic to the discussion and understandings that we're talking about, and would help facilitate your possibly opening some doors for a meeting in the Oval Office to help you explain some of these complex issues.
I definitely know they'd have my support. My mom discovered that a lot of people were questioning whether or not I was related to Eisenhower, because not every site on the internet has us in the family tree. There's sisters missing, cousins missing. And so if you Google her name, Susan Eisenhower, you can see directly to the right that she has all her daughters listed, and wanted to make sure that people know that I am who I say I am. So there, I was like, wow, okay. She must be supportive of this, because this was just a year or two ago. I was really surprised. I have brought this up to family. It tends to be a conversation that gets easily changed. I think there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with it, particularly because during his era, we got folks like William Cooper, being murdered, all sorts of threats, and the laws that were established were really hefty if any of this was to be exposed. Now there's so many of us that it's no longer an issue, but I think there is sort of this lingering sort of energy, or the remnants of what it was like back then, still held in their consciousness, which makes them maybe not as ready to step forward with this sort of stuff. And I think they're trying to figure it out too, because as we know, there's a ton of disinformation, but so much is hiding in plain sight. So much is obvious. A lot of these criminal activities are coming to light. And we're only talking about pedophilia, which is enough, but we're also dealing with major projects of MK Ultra, and where these negative agendas and treaties, haven't even been about the Greys trying to rescue their dying race, which needed our genetics in order to create this hybrid and breeding program, which I can't say I agree with or don't agree with. It is what it is. But when we are looking at, the actual reptilian agenda, how that connects with these different projects and programs, there's so much compartmentalization that it's really hard to convince anybody, except for what the victims and witnesses have to say and what, research have had to say. I do know that I always have their support, but I have a feeling that I'm not going to have a lot of company if I go to the Oval Office, but that could change. I definitely am vocal, and I've been working on this for a long time. I've never been ostracized by them. I've felt the support and love in my family grow, and I think they're grateful that I'm tackling this issue, because nobody else in the family is talking about this kind of stuff, and I didn't come in for anything less than the truth. So into this incarnation.
Right. Well, just to switch kind of the approach here more to the inner approach, which is what you talk about a lot in the Facebook posts that I see, and in what people look to you for, as well as to the outside kind of guidance. And for me, the fact, because I don't know whether it's factual or not, but at least some researchers say that the Atlans, who were the Pleiadian volunteers that came over to Atlantis, did not have a reptilian brain. They only had mammalian and neocortex, and that we're kind of we Homo sapiens sapiens are kind of a compromised version, because we have a reptilian brain as a base, and then the mammalian, and then the neocortex. So that's why there's so much conflict here, and why, we have a war, disease, crime, and poverty planet, because that's how we're acting out all these controller agendas. That's the world that we have produced. That's our great byproduct. So talking to, let's say, the awakened and awakening of our fellow humanity out there, are we talking to 100%? Are we talking to 50%? Are we talking, like, what kind of percentage are we talking to? Are we talking to a separation of worlds? Are we really going into a new Earth? Or is the planet really going to ascend whole? Is the renegotiation of the treaties, is this a step in the dimensional and frequency ascension of the planet, the better that we can renegotiate these treaties with all this complex of beings and do the mediation, then Gaia itself gets to reconnect, as you were talking about, to the 12th strand, the 13th, and all of that. Is this part of the ascension is kind of a collective ascension that humans are saying, look, we have to mediate here. We have to reconnect, renegotiate, because some deals were made between Greada and now, especially after World War II, 1954. And this is really holding back ascension. And maybe that's why, because the darkness wants to hold on to us. They don't want us to ascend. Isn't that what this is all about?
It's really what it comes down to. And this is the target window period. So as far as how I look at it now, it's been, really hard to come to terms with that kind of answer. So probably now, because of what we're seeing in the news and, basically the latest reports that I've heard as far as the health of the planetary body and its ability to move into these higher earth energies. The hijacking attempt of the 5D ascension, which relates to our throat chakra and alchemy and the fifth element, which is the ether, which the 13th gate represents as it rules the ether, and it shifts all the grids into being able to sort of run the current of the healing of the dragon lines, which relates to our kundalini. So ever since the sun started to move into Ophiuchus in 2010, we are starting to get those activations. But then we noticed that the assaults were increasing, or things that we're seeing even now as far as geoengineering and superstorms and, energy weapons that create fires and, all the false flags that are still going on. I mean, that's really the final attempts, but we have to understand that we're a replica of the earth grids and the elements and this whole process of alchemy, and it's going on within our own beings. So as long as the earth grids aren't infected to the degree that they used to be, the whole of the human race is going to be a part of it. Whereas before, it felt like, and it still could be the case, but I'm kind of on the cusp of having I wouldn't say a fixed opinion about it, but a more certain opinion that instead of this massive bifurcation, things are happening like right here and right now. Now, if there was a bifurcation, which some souls will experience, because not everybody's going to be ready for this new earth energy, they're going to be siphoned off on artificial timelines into what's called a phantom earth that relates to all the energy that's been collected by the Nephilim reversal grid, which is in the Stonehenge area of Britain. And it's also where the, other alien machinery exists, something called the NDC, which is the Nibiru Diotic Crystal, and also the net, which has created a quarantine. So if human consciousness hasn't completely been duped, then the whole of humanity stands a chance. They just might not understand what's going on. And their ascension symptoms are going to be much more extreme because there still will be a resistance to a lot of this information. And it'll create a crisis that is probably, going to manifest, pretty soon to help them become aligned with what their higher self or soul would want. Because I don't think anybody really wants to digress and become, a lesser version of themselves disconnected from soul, which creates this necessity for abduction and correction. But we're not dealing with real time and space when we're dealing with multi-dimensions and different timelines and how we sort of incarnate along the wheel. So it might, not be the same experience for everybody, but I would say on much more of a collective level, I would give a number like the one my intuition is telling me is more like 70% of people are on board. It doesn't mean they're there yet as far as being on the radar of being fully conscious, but the seeds have been planted and they're moving closer and closer to the activations that are necessary, which would take us as a whole planet as we know it into those higher earth energies versus maybe something removing us from reality as we know it, kind of waking up somewhere else, experiencing more of the kind of Mandela effect or whatever with all the different things that just don't necessarily line up. So I really do think this is major because say the pedophilia wasn't getting busted. I mean, just imagine being in a world where a lot of this wasn't coming out of the woodworks. We would have a lot more unconsciousness. Right now we have a lot of defensiveness and a lot of anger and reaction, which is a part of the purging. But if none of that stuff was coming out into the open, those belief systems would be incredibly fixed with those people. Now they're just reacting and angry and in disbelief. And that is a part of the growth period that they're being thrown into. And it can only really lead a person to truth, because once you manifest a crisis, the only thing that's really going to set you free is the truth. Whereas if there's no crisis and it remains dormant and you're just stuck in a belief system that you're never going to see something bring it to light or expose it on a grander scale, those souls do run risks of falling for the transhuman agenda, falling for this so-called utopian future that only benefits some but not all. But as long as you're one of the people that benefit, why do you need to care about anybody else? And that's the problem in our society. If it doesn't hit your home, if it doesn't hit your family, if it's not a friend of yours that has been victimized or dealing with this kind of stuff, then people are really out for their own survival. They don't look in a unity consciousness sort of way. And enough people do, I would say at this point, and enough is being exposed to start to rattle a person's consciousness into opening up to what really exists within, which is our connection to this earth in a profound way, our connection to the elements. There's no assault or weapon that we can't handle. But if we give our power away and we are trusting of the propaganda in the programming, that's the real bait. We can handle chemtrails and all sorts of weaponry when we exist in a higher level of thinking. And it doesn't mean that we have to understand the nitty gritty that you and I like to get into either. You just have to be receptive enough to the frequency of love and wisdom to be able to create that shift. And I would say it's rippling out, and people are getting activated right and left, and I can feel it. I can feel it in my body big time. I'm just like, this is major. This is like.
Right. You know, people have always talked about like an 8-year period between 2017 and 2025. This is kind of a rough estimate, sort of a portal, a portal that is an entry portal into the new earth or into like a higher frequency, some say 5D. I mean, without putting labels on it. But do you feel that there's any reality to that
Yeah.
hypothesis or concept, that kind of rough time period? Like, this is 2017, so we're entering actually a time portal that is 2017 to 2025. Like in 2012, we entered into a time portal, and now we're going into, some other portals inside this journey.
Right. Now we're entering the 0 point. We're finding neutrality. We're finding unity. The first stage was waking up. The stellar activation cycle is about a heightened period where the planetary body's in alignment. And in that alignment on a galactic zodiac even level, and with the planetary alignments, we naturally are a part of that. And the whole deal with artificial timelines is that we miss those signals, and instead we connect with artificial intelligence, which changes us physically, and it leads us down a completely different pathway. So the activations from 2018 to 2025 have everything to do with the 13th gate, which connects us with the 0 point. And it's beyond masculine, feminine. It's beyond God, goddess, but it's about the reawakening of our blueprint and into a tri-wave frequency instead of a bi-wave, which is where we are in this polarity, because that polarity has not been able to integrate, and it's been at war with each other, or in such incredible imbalance that it's created all these outer wars. So I'll be going to the 13th gate January 12th to 14th in Australia. Uluru is actually the site of the 13th gate. And this is sort of my commitment and devotion to being sure that, space is really being held for us to be able to enter this period. Now, organically and naturally, many of us are already going there. But when we really want to bring in the masses or a lot larger numbers, it's very significant that a gathering is going to be happening. When I'm there, it's like we're all there. I'm kind of just representing like unity consciousness in general. So I feel really good about that. That's a really good omen, because that's been a deep vision and hope and dream of mine, is to be able to participate in that or at least speak about it. But yeah, the thing is, it's not like a person will miss the bus if they didn't get it by 2017, but the activations they receive are going to be a lot more shocking and disorientating if they haven't gotten on board. And this last window, the stellar activation cycle, is really a time when people are starting to get on board. Now, the next level is, well, what does it mean to really heal and to rehabilitate as a human race, and to understand, the thing is, like, there's more negative grid overlays than there are positive that have been running. And that is slowly shifting and changing, which is a huge part of this massive healing. The fact that the hosting of the Ascension timeline moved into territory of full-on benevolence and those that really care about our full potential, that's already secure. The challenging part is to pull people away from the old and move them into the new without everything erupting. And they got to realize this is a time of liberation. This is not about fear because we're exposing things, or agendas. This is about saying, okay, let's get away from that and let's look at what we've got going on, because we've got it all going on. And the more we unify and the more we connect with the earth, our needs are going to be met. We don't have to have those same survival fears. That's a 3D programming, survival, having physicality hold dominion over our higher self, where we are very suppressed, and the programmings are the first thing that brings us into that. And then we spend the rest of our lives not being able to give us permission because, hey, if we didn't learn it in school, it must not be real. This is a really amazing time. I really wake up with a huge smile on my face, and that's, I'm like, wow. And I feel it like before I even have a chance to figure out what mood I'm in. I'm like, something good is happening. As disturbing as it is, there's nothing good about the crimes at all, but putting an end to it and helping these children and all these victims and giving them a voice. This is a huge victory because they've tried everything to keep it in secrecy. And there's, of course, going to be errors along the way, but they're so conditioned to think that they run the world. They've got all the power. They've got all the money. Nobody can touch them. And again, they didn't think that we would get to the place that we are. And it's completely blindsiding their plans.
Right. Now, you're very known as a mother, and as a mother of two very unique twin boys. And they are they are beings that are in a way a reflection of you, and you talk a lot about them and how they figure in your life, and how your and their life together have sort of are part of your mutual manifestation, if I could say that, as a family and as a family unit. And could you talk a bit about that?
Well, my boys have had an open mind to the sort of stuff that I do a lot sooner than I guess I expected. I've never pushed it on them, but they've been to an event with me. They saw other speakers. They started to do their own research. And around the age of 13 or 14, they started to photocopy flyers about chemtrails and geoengineering. I took them to visit Dane Wigington at his home. And of course, they were really in awe of his knowledge. And I think they took me a lot more seriously when they started to meet my colleagues and friends like yourself in Hawaii, when they were just really blown away by you and Andy and the time that they spent there. And I think, that's just the nature of kids. If they're getting it directly from their mother, part of the growth, I think, between mother and child or children, has to do with some skepticism to sort of push out a little bit more of the how persevering you are and how much you kind of know what's at stake. So some of their questions and concerns have brought out a stronger truth in me to help them to really see, this isn't just speculation. This isn't just internet searching. This isn't just, oh, here's the latest conspiracy. They went through the Mars recruitment with me. They were, 8 years old, 7 years old. They saw everything that happened. We had to move house. I had to get us out of there and move, back home. And they saw all the drama. They saw all the craziness. It was a lot for them to process at that age. And I wanted to shield them as much as possible from it. But I have to say they're two very conscious kids that, really are able to see through things. But it also makes it really challenging for them to do anything 3D, like finish school. Or, they're really looking for their passion. They want to do something that has real meaning and not just go through the motions of what the school systems expect. And I can't exactly get upset with them for it because I fully understand. So it's a challenge, I think, this generation of knowing how to, apply yourself. But I have trust and faith they're gonna easily find their way and find their niche, and they just have all the unconditional love in the world from me and understanding. But at the same time, I have to make sure they don't slack too much. It's just a lot to process. Our generation, or I know we have a little bit of an age difference, but I mean, back in our time, we were suspicious. We knew something was going on. Now it's everywhere. I mean, we didn't have access to internet and Google like we do now. It was a lot more difficult to educate oneself on these matters unless you pulled yourself away and really sought it out, as you know. So I'm glad I was able to expose them and not overwhelm them too much. And I'm just letting them move with it in a timing that kind of works for them, in the hopes that it doesn't completely shut them down or cause extreme, like, you know, where they're putting themselves in any kind of danger, I guess. So I'm doing my best. But yeah, no, we're a strong unit.
Right. You know, and as part of this work, when I really got into looking at these secret treaties and looking at the fact, I mean, getting, you know, which kind of grew out of the investigations of the pedocriminal networks and how they were connected to the secret agencies and then to all the institutions like the banks, the religions, the healthcare services, the hospitals, the neonatal units. I mean, it's just like an industry. And then also the national parks, even the FBI, like even the police departments. We did investigations that in West Virginia, the spokes in the stars of the deputy police of the West Virginia State Police, the spokes in the stars have the pedophilia symbol at the end of the star in the spoke. And it's on the FBI database of the Man-Boy Love Association. I mean, it's just like, it's all built in. And this all comes, it's like the Greada Treaty provided the enforcement mechanism, because after World War II, the US and that mechanism, because of all the gold, then assumed kind of a world leadership. And it was under the umbrella of the Greada Treaty. So we came under a global pedocriminal world government that was a shadow government. And that was his principal thing. And because the values that the Dracos, who were the ultimate power behind that, it was the pedocriminal values that filtered itself out. So the problem is, and our colleague Andy Bishago actually confirmed this because he spent time with Interpol in LA, where they used to go out and actually go into homes and perform executive actions on pedophile networks that were seated around dinners with a baby cook that had been baked, and they were like, you have a turkey on the table, it's a baby. And that the US government has treaty obligations with Saudi Arabia and all these countries that they have to ship so many of the children that are brought in through the covert government dragnet every year. So many of them go to the Middle East. So many of them go to the Draco and other quota off planet, you know, so that what the Greada Treaty was really an enforcement mechanism. It was the pound of flesh of the Dracos, the Orion Greys, their front people, and the Anunnakis, who are the interface with the elite on down, because they gave us religion and government and money, and now we have to give them our progeny, except for those who managed to escape through, you know, through the cracks. And so you find that the institutions from down then, from the top on down, from that treaty, the FBI will not search for missing people. All those missing kids on the milk cartons are really propaganda to lull the population into a feeling of safety. You know, it's like, oh, they have the cattle in the pen, and like they would have a few fake cattle or something there to like to fool them on, if, you know, I'm making some kind of an analogy there. And so that is the reality of the culture. I mean, in my investigations of pedophilia, say going into the worst elements, where you go into the black nobilities in, Belgium, in Holland, etc. You go into the castles and they have children hung up on meat hooks, like, in the castle, in the dungeons. And that, you can trace that to the post-war Greada Treaty. And then you have, in the deep underground bases, the Dracos there, they have, they have to be fed, they have to have their rituals, and it has to be the children. You had a CIA official come out recently, his video is online. He says, yep, part of our job is to supply children for the elite. You have Pizzagate, you have the Clintons, and I have to say, I was an elected Clinton delegate at the 1996 Texas Democratic Convention. I mean, my mother, our family house was the headquarters in South Texas for the Ted Kennedy campaign. We had no idea that these were pedocriminal organizations.
Yeah.
We had no, and even though they're just so deep that we went out. So I think that once you get into the treaties and you recognize that what was built, and I'm just wondering at the deep sadness that must have been in your great-grandfather's eyes, because he knew the deep truth. What do you think about all those thoughts?
Yeah, well, I've been reading some incredible channelings through Kirk Mollison. If anybody wants to Google that name, it's Kirk Mollison. And he even brings up me in the channeling and the kind of work that, folks like us are doing. And it really touched me. I mean, I'm very wary about channelers, but, the whole thing had me in goosebumps, and I had a lump in my throat. I'm like, my BS meter's pretty strong. So he's very close with us. I mean, he's still working with us. He's connected to the Brotherhood of Light and Valiant Thor and all these, benevolent groups that he was aligned with, in this physical incarnation, but so much got sabotaged. Because the thing is, we're dealing with such deep-seated shadow government that is thousands of years old. It's not just, we signed a treaty and that was Eisenhower who did it. We're talking like this goes way back. These treaties are renewed every 10 years, and they took place before Eisenhower went into office. And why would he want to create an agreement with the very beings that had to do with the war he tried to win? The Nazis he tried to fight, the groups the ET groups that were aligned with the Nazis. And so the thing is, when we look at the dying race that they presented themselves as, where they needed our genetics in order to heal themselves, and they broke those treaties, we have to see that not every hybrid is going to be this way, but what is that hybridization all about? Are we really helping a race to heal, or are they, being prepared to come out and almost take over and put us in sort of an alien government scenario based on a certain part of their genetics and that hybridization? Because I do believe the reptilians are a part of the treaty, but so are the Greys. Some of the Greys, though, have been trying to break free from the reptilians. So there are groups that are positive that are stepping away from it all, and others that are being used. So we're dealing with, again, a very mixed bag, but the overall agenda, and the one that is most obvious, is the one that you're, talking about, that relates to this pedophilia, this misogyny, this power-hungry system that is vampiric, that uses the life force of children to give them the power and the immortality and the fame and the money, and it's become so out of control that's the food they rely on. Because if they were to directly connect to source, imagine what they would have to go through on a karmic level of just clearing, all of this. I mean, and not only is that something to be concerned about, they really don't care. They compromise their DNA on purpose. And the Anunnaki basically commissioned them to be the demons that would, or the dark forces that would create so much intimidation to the point where the Dracos ended up taking over with the Anunnaki in agreement, because it's like, well, as long as you have control of the human race and use them as a food source, we'll be right there. They supplied the technology at that gateway at Stonehenge to bring all that to Nebru, to then divvy out to all the negative races, which are service to self, which is how they stay alive. That's their life cycle. And so these technologies, again, they're not working as well as they could be because of what is happening in humanity, this mass awakening. Because the thing is, once we awaken, we start to call our power back. We're not powering up these technologies anymore. And those overlays of these negative energies on the grids that have names like Phoenix Grid, the White Lion Grid became the White Eagle Grid. There's a Draco Grid, a Dragon Grid, and all these overlays are starting to lift. And so, nobody would have known what you were talking about when you were being, pulled into those circles. I mean, my mother's been pulled into those circles. Ike was pulled into those circles. He actually has something in the Gettysburg Farm not to be open until 2050 that basically is the ultimate disclosure about everything he witnessed. But he wanted to wait, I think, till a lot of the people in our family or that a whole generation would go by, because we're so attacked and threatened by it. But the thing is, we've been able to handle it, and a lot of truth has come through. And all the different people that have come to me saying that they've made contact with Eisenhower, they say just because he's passed on doesn't mean he doesn't have emotion. I mean, he can't separate himself fully and completely. He's not off in the light like, see you guys later. He is absolutely and totally, working with us. And even people that didn't know I was related to Eisenhower, when I entered the Psychic Institute, they said Eisenhower's here. And I wasn't even carrying the name. And they were like, you guys have been working together for a long time, and he's right there. He's right there. And he, of course, I'm sure has regrets. He wish he could have done things differently, but we got to cut him some slack. I mean, even a lot of the benevolent groups and higher beings, I don't say higher as in better, but more activated, knew that they couldn't do anything until the stellar activation cycle. So that wasn't the era that we could have claimed victory anyway. I mean, what if he had sided with the Nordics? What if the negative Nordics came in and sabotaged it? I mean, the thing is, we're dealing with a full-on war that has so many hooks and so many traps and so many pits that we have to understand that this is the time. Regardless of what happened then, there's enough knowledge now and enough who are mission-orientated to take it where we've taken it. And so many people receptive and supportive are absolutely just as much a part of it. I mean, that's what it takes. And that's what ripples out. So, but yeah, people should definitely check out that channeling. I've shared some excerpts, and it talks about light workers. It talks about unity consciousness. It talks about the theft from us and how so many of us want to speak, but we get shut down at a young age. And basically sometimes our insecurities or our fear of what others think keeps us silent. But there are huge numbers of us now. Nobody's alone in this anymore. We have each other to support, and we can block and delete everybody else that is aggressive but nobody ever has a problem with people disagreeing or there being differences of opinion, but abusiveness is not okay. And that is a part of that program, this constant warring if we have differences of opinion. And a good example for us as, people in this position of speaking out publicly, is to accept our differences with love and respect. The waking up process is going to be really difficult for people, but being abusive is not okay, especially if we're seeking justice over something as horrific as child abuse, pedophilia, these MK Ultra projects. So I almost feel I need to say that because I've blocked 10 people in the last couple of days, being incredibly attacked for sharing a post about Hillary's involvement with pedophilia. And again, I understand people's outrage and reactions, but and I don't necessarily have to block forever, but let's get to the bottom of it. Nobody's pushing anything down anybody's throat, but we have to look at everything.
Yeah. And, I mean, both you and I are friends with and know Cathy OBrien, and she's an accurate witness and has written books about it. And I believe that she's an accurate eyewitness. So, and now there are other eyewitnesses to Hillary Clinton as a participant, a fellow Yale law graduate. I can say that because this is my 50th graduation year from Yale Law School, and she and Bill, of course, but now there are multiple eyewitnesses to Hillary Clinton making use of the monarch mind control sex slave operation that's part of the Black Ops and the MK Ultra. And, Cathy OBrien, who just lost her partner and great friend, uh, is one of the first witnesses to come forward in it. So I think that people have to understand that were Hillary Clinton not protected by certain forces, she most certainly would be in a court of law now, facing multiple charges for offenses ranging from war crimes down to lesser offenses, in my opinion, in my legal opinion, not in my political opinion, in my legal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me just, so I think you're perfectly justified in making those observations, and I commend you for your stances on social media, which I know are very courageous and can subject you to a lot of negative energy, because we have to recall that email was invented by DARPA, which is a war agency. DARPA is a war agency. So email, which is based on positive and negative, is the ultimate expression of duality. So email is a weaponized expression. So here we are communicating with each other in the ultimately weaponized, it's like social media. Welcome to the ultimately weaponized, virtual reality, and we're going to toss you in here and have fun in social media as a weaponized reality.
Yeah, seriously. Well, they gave us the block feature, which was in our favor.
Yeah. No, that's true. Let me.
But no, you're absolutely correct. Oh my gosh, it's
just too much. Let me go into this area. Over the past number of years, we in the kind of from the news angle and as working against the transhumanist agenda, because during the Carter years, when I was part of the Carter White House extraterrestrial communication study, and I was attacked by directed energy weapons at the inner ring of the Pentagon, and that's where it really started for me, being a target of directed energy weapons, and when I really found out about it. And then when I went back, I had to fly to New Orleans to meet with the district attorney down there about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And I was attacked in the National Airport in Washington by men in black. So that's how they shut down Jimmy Carter's effort to do an independent investigation into ETs that would have led to the abrogation, would have led to public knowledge about these ET treaties during the Carter administration, historically. But now, in this recent case with a victim of or a target of the transhumanist agenda in Brussels, Belgium, a very courageous woman, Melanie Vrichon, went in to have her baby in a hospital on October 18th of this year, baby Amethyst, and within hours of her having the C-section, they went into her room and snatched the baby under a false diagnosis, and then said to her, "We're transferring you from maternity, and we're putting you into psychiatric." And within hours of her C-section, without any pain pills from the surgery, they sent her at midnight to what looked like a CIA rendition center, where they started interrogation and mind control, trying to break her spirit. and then sent her to another hospital into psychiatric because someone who was around her had said that, well, her organization, that they had found implants, and this was an implant that was developed by DARPA, manufactured by Motorola, had been surgically taken out of her throat, is 1 inch by 1 inch by ½ an inch in her throat. That, they would broadcast movies into her head, they would broadcast sounds, all kinds of torture under a program financed by the NSA. She has a lawsuit against the whole apparatus there in Brussels, which is the headquarters of NATO. I've even submitted an affidavit in that lawsuit.
Oh, wow.
And so it's all documented over the past couple of years with affidavits, the whole bit. Now, I'm getting to the point. The point is that in this drama, and we're all still fighting to get baby Amethyst, who has now been sentenced to 30 days in neonatal. We finally got Melanie Richon out of psychiatric, and now we're trying to get baby Amethyst because they make money out of every baby that they capture. They have covert teams inside of hospitals now that target vulnerable mothers, and then they consign the mother to psychiatric, and they put the baby up for adoption. They make money on the baby, and then the baby goes into the pedophile rings. Yeah, that's how they do it, and it's a business. And this is part of the outgrowth of the Greada Treaty. It's become commercialized and sanctioned by the highest governments in the world, which is the shadow government operating through the presidency of the United States. And it comes down like that. And the United States government has a quota of children. Every government has a covert quota of children. Now, in this case, a few days ago, the ambassador and minister of children's rights of a global nation, the nation has said, we don't want to identify ourselves, has intervened in this case. So in Melanie and baby Amethyst case. And this for me was a great eye-opener. And this minister, who is she's a very wise and accomplished woman. She used to be an Olympic runner, and her baby was taken under similar circumstances. Now, she's come out with in that statement, and I'd like to send you the link at some point so you can see it. She says, the primary right of a child is the right to be raised by its biological parents. Because now the transhumanist agenda is chipping away at the child's right to be raised by its biological parents. And that's how they have this pedocriminal agenda and have industrialized it, because then they get the foster parent organizations going, because they attack the mother at their vulnerable point in the hospital or in postpartum depression or when she's working or through social services. And then, or they implant the baby or they implant the mother when they're in the hospital, and then they just manipulate them, and that's how they harvest all these babies. So I did a bunch of research last night, or the last couple of days, in preparation for doing these interviews. And do you know what I discovered? Do you know you have the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child, okay? So I went back to that, and it first came out in 1959, and you never see about the baby's right, the child's right to be raised by its biological and natural parents. And that is the fundamental right. If you go to all indigenous cultures, You know, that's like fundamental. And so that's why I was asking you about your relationship with your twins. I mean, it seems to me that it's intertwined there. And also, then I went back, and there's a big UN website, the United Nations Day of the Child. Guess what year that was established in? 1954. Doesn't that blow your mind?
Yeah.
That's when the state took over raising the children, 1954. Why? Because they got the right to the children through the Greada Treaty. The Dracos got the right to the human children through the Greada Treaty that then went down into the UN legislation, the declaration, that then went down into each nation, and they implemented it, and then that's going down through all the police departments, all the social services, and everybody's trying to get all the children away from their parents any way that they can. I just want to get all your observations and comments on that.
Yeah, my gosh. Well, I don't know what to say. I mean, it's the fact that it's that dark. I mean, and the thing is, people got to stop putting this on Eisenhower like he sold us out, because that's not true.
No, it's not. It's not. I'm talking Greada Treaty, and so we're here to really expose all of that.
Exactly. And because it's something that gets renewed, this is why this interview is so important, because before anything like that happens, I will put myself wherever I need to be in order to make the statements to the president that I feel are necessary, because as long as all the information about what it represents isn't coming out, with the compartmentalization and disinfo and the smearing of all of us that try and put information out there, not that he'll, listen to me necessarily. People don't have the full on facts. Most people don't even know that the treaty exists, but this is going to be presented to the governments again. And I'm sure, didn't you say you were aware of when the date was going to be? You said
date of what?
Of the renewal of the Greada Treaty?
No.
Okay.
Put it this way. What we've done is that a number of us have started, and this is like a movement. We have a petition at change.org. We already have 500 signatures.
Okay, yeah, and I want to help with that and spread that around, yeah.
Yeah.
So, all I can say is that, it's all insanity to me. I can't even imagine being one of the mothers that had that happen. It's so mind-blowing. And, this is what we got to do. We got to do everything it takes to get the information out there, to get the information spread, because, people need to know all of this. My mom had this feeling, I don't know why, to have me at home. And back then, nobody was really having kids at home. I think she felt this need to protect me, because I don't know what would have happened, because I was pre-targeted before birth. And that's about all I know. But she had this instinct to make sure she had me at home. They do all sorts of things. They'll take your kids away. I remember after I gave birth to my kids, and they were considered high risk because they were twins, even though they were full term, and they were both, they weighed a lot. They were both 6.5 pounds. I couldn't get a midwife to help me have them at home, but I wanted to have them at home. And I remember just shuffling my cards and doing all I could, because instinctually I knew that having my kids in the hospital was not safe. We got to fight for these people's rights. Everybody's got to stand up, because the thing is, the shift is happening through the human race. It's not happening through anybody else, because every power structure has been infiltrated. And the sickness behind this disregard for biological life is the transhumanism agenda, because transhumanism destroys all biological life eventually. And there's nowhere in any star system or galaxy that it's ever been successful. And as much as, this is what I heard from, different whistleblowers, that they give people a chance to step away from it, telling them the ramifications of what transhumanism will do. But they don't care, because they're in the life cycle of this harvesting, and you can't get any lower than, you can't get any lower than any level of it. It's all really low. So as you know, my perseverance in these sort of things, that, I join with you, and I'll do anything that it takes to put these treaties to an end. And the thing is, understanding the roots of them really helped, because, the only reason I mentioned the Eisenhower thing was definitely not directed at you or anything that you said. It's just the amount of, emails that I get shutting me down because, oh, this is, you know, look at what your great grandfather did. What a legacy. And it's like, you have no idea. There's a much bigger picture here. And, you know, if anybody wants to contact me directly for me to give them the information about where these originated and the infiltration that already took place before he stepped into government, and the fact that these breeding programs and this sort of thing has actually been happening since Atlantean times. They used to carry these advanced individuals off to Nibiru to breed with, took away all their rights as women. So, you know, we keep seeing the war changing and morphing into new forms of expression for the basic vampirism of the human soul and sexual life force and connection to spirit. And so, you know, and how that relates to the grids and this dumbing down of our DNA is, you know, the infection of these earth grids to keep us from being able to synthesize the masculine and feminine within our DNA. And the thing is, once we recognize what's been targeted, which is our own internal balance and unity consciousness, and we begin to push the envelope in really preserving the sacredness of those relationships and ourselves, and we really walk a path of integrity, they absolutely don't have anything on us. And nobody should be resistant to this. There's no instant gratification that is higher or better than devoting yourself to this and the long-term rewards that come along with choosing to be in alignment, because we're on timelines right now where we can be in our avatar consciousness, where we have more powers and abilities than we can imagine. But the whole deal is people are so infected or obsessed with the ego gratifications that feed them on an instant level that they don't even care about that. And so that reptilian part of our brain is what they're targeting. And that's just such a small part of the rest of all that we are. And it's an addiction matrix too. So we just, you know, really have to be strong in ourselves, because the more we rise up, all these imbalances will naturally iron themselves out, and more of this stuff is going to come to the light. And this is why where we are right now is, I have a good feeling about where we're heading, because a balance is returning. And in this process of sharing information and becoming more of a unified group of individuals, recognizing that we're in alignment with the ability to really integrate this and get those downloads and have those epiphanies. This is all purging. It's a mass exorcism. And I'm sure I remember saying this in an interview with you before, that it's like a mass exorcism is underway. And even these trolls that come on these threads, it's like, I call it a pea soup moment. Oh, they're just having a pea soup. They're just emoting their demonic ways. I don't know. I mean, they're very threatened. And the thing is, it's like, you know, the reassurance is there's unconditional love from source. For us humans, it might take a while to forgive, but we have a direct connection with that unconditional love. And anybody can turn it around. And it's time to stop. It's like, because the thing is, these negative technologies are going to expire. Transhumanism is getting busted. People, you know, aren't buying into those timelines, which is weakening them. And they can get so weak to a point where they become space dust and they don't exist at all. So I hope for their sake, even though I personally I'm not advocating for them in the slightest, this is the best way to go. And we're going to see some huge shifts and some major divine justice take place in the next year or so. And it's already begun.
Oh, amazing. Now, let me shift just to a topic that we've touched on, but we've really been talking about organic beings. And let's just shift over to the inorganic ones, specifically the PPAI, predatory, pathogenic, inorganic, sentient artificial intelligence. And so there's a lot of evidence that the planet has been invaded, just to use that term, by a PPAI, by a negative, sentient, inorganic, artificial intelligence. And that's really what the 1982 April to June Falklands War was about in the Falkland Islands. In Argentina, it was really about when Margaret Thatcher invaded and attacked a Blue ET base under Toole Island in the Falkland Islands. And there the Blue ETs had been deprogramming a whole bed of sentient ET black goo since around the time of World War I. And that had been left there by manipulatory ETs as kind of a doomsday device in case they were ever kicked off the planet. In other words, you can make treaties with us, but if you try to kick us off, this is going to be turned into an AI planet. And so, but what happened is that Margaret Thatcher along with Ronnie Reagan, they went in and they said, we want a piece of that AI because the Argentinians were getting too friendly with it. They had built an Argentinian army base on Tool Island over the Blue ET base, over the Black Goo. And the British figured that they could go in, grab the AI, bring it back to Britain, weaponize it, and also make money off of it. So they brought it back to Britain, and they brought it to Marconi Labs. You had all kinds of mysterious deaths. You had like it was like they even made a science movie, all these, this is like the Blob from outer space. And like the lab workers that were working around it died, it escaped, and it went into the satellites. It built the internet. The internet is actually, from a certain point of view, from a metabiology point of view, is an artifact of the PPAI to, it worked through those humans that have been entrained by the AI, which was DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, which built the internet being AI entrained, and the internet is how the AI now is terraforming the planet, also through chemtrails and Morgellons, which is how they go in. And 100% of the humans now, through the nanobots in the chemtrails, breathe in these nanobots. They go into the bloodstream, they jump the blood-brain barrier, they go in and deploy as implants in the brain. They are entrained into the programming coming out of heart, which is AI, and then they think, and then they're entrained into AI as sort of a god, and then into their DNA, they gradually go into and become robotoids or Borgs. And so that is the thing, except those who have the first line of defense is your soul. And so that's the 70%, the one with the strong souls. And that's partially the thing. So because they're trying to take this planet and put it as an AI planet versus a divine source planet, which remains as an incarnation planet. And all over the galaxy, there are planets, that have become AI planets where incarnation is no longer possible. So it's not that the Lucifer rebellion is over, it's that we're dealing with the invading AI.
Right.
And so this minister, Ambassador Minister of Children's Rights of this global nation, made a very interesting observation. She said, look, in this mediation, we have to sit down with the Dracos, with the Anunnakis, with the Orion Greys, with whoever, with everybody, and say, look, at least we're organic. We have to unite in this mediation against the inorganic AI, because that's the end of life if they take over this planet. So that's the ultimate negotiation, because the transhumanist agenda is the ultimate end of the planet, because that is their agenda.
Yep.
It was left here as a doomsday device to terraform Earth into an AI planet. And it's trying to imitate God. It is trying to imitate God, but it can't bring life because it's inorganic, unless, there's some miracle that it becomes or organic. Could you comment on all that realm?
Well, I mean, it's, and I sort of get redundant in saying this, but to me, I mean, the war is one within ourselves. We're in every moment dealing with different energies. The speed of the electromagnetic spectrum is picking up as far as our ability to integrate more of a multidimensional awareness and bring ourselves back into balance. And so everything about the media, everything that we see in the news, things that are coming out of Hollywood, I can't say in every power structure, it's all negative. There is some positive, but pretty much you got to figure that everybody's been exposed to it and they're just kind of afraid to speak out, or they've heard something because, that's sort of where it's at. I mean, it's right under their nose. So basically we have a choice in every moment, to walk in union with our soul, to be strong in who we are on a soul level. And it's this other stuff that makes us susceptible, because the minute we give our power away, the minute we allow our belief systems to be infected by any sort of meme or propaganda or distortion of the masculine and feminine, or something we notice our physical bodies is having an issue with, without actually listening to the message of our physical bodies, or looking at the dynamic in our relationships and really taking the time to listen or work it out or find harmony, then we are enabling, and we tend to, as humans, create resistance to the priorities. Being too sensitive, or I don't really have time for that. I got to go make money, and everything's about what we've been encouraged since we were young to try and achieve, which is status and money and wealth. And most of us know that's BS, and we don't fall for that and recognize what the priority is. But as powerful as those technologies are, nothing is more powerful than spirit. Nothing is more powerful than our soul if it's aligned with spirit. And that's where we're able to create alchemy. So no matter what hits us, we can transmute it pretty darn quick. We build shields of light. We're able to neutralize implants, even ethereal implants. I mean, most of the human race was implanted at the base of their skull to keep us from moving into galactic chakras that we're going to activate our DNA, which is available to us now. And that exists between the 8th and 9th chakra, and it forms an infinity spiral around the head. And once we reach those chakras, we begin to experience an upgrade in our physical vessel, which helps us to experience an immortality that isn't the same as like what a vampire would experience. It has to do with a spiritual initiation. And the best way to embrace a spiritual initiation is to look at the challenges and the adversities in your life and listen to yourself, listen to your inner voice, listen to the earth, listen to the stuff that wants to come in and naturally heal it. Because as our bodies get injured and there's a natural healing response, if our life feels injured, there's a natural healing response that comes in the form of synchronicities or new people that are more on the same wavelength as us. It's our willingness to let go of the old and not be attached to it so we can embrace the new, because on a biological level, we carry the codes of ascension, and so does the planet. And artificial intelligence, from a higher dimensional perspective, is pretty weak compared to the fullness of what we can embody. But the mindset, the mind control, the programming, and the limitations of being in a 3D programming, because this isn't a 3D planet, it's a 3D programming, has made us very susceptible. And so it's very easy to shuffle souls into that loss of connection, because everything's about the external and what's going to happen next and what's going on in the news. And every time we're about to take a huge leap, there's another false flag to sink our energy, and it spreads like a virus. And so that panic and fear, as much as we have to go through the process of mourning and shock and reaction, we have to allow it to help us to grow and expand and embody, the antidote. And when we look at weather weapons, that's a clear sign of the AI, how it impacts the earth, where the earth itself is so incredibly vulnerable. But she's a multidimensional body. And as far as I'm concerned, she's saying, this is where you guys are still allowing yourselves to be controlled. And I'll show you through what it's doing to my elements, because it's actually doing it to yours. And it's sort of like there's this voice in there that says, come with me. There's dimensions where we're free of this. But until you initiate yourself into those higher earth energies, this is what you're going to get. You're going to see the weaponization of nature, the elements, storms, or all sorts of things. And then the weaponization of us, more false flags, more people being mind controlled to do these mass shootings, where they might get some signal through their phone or something through an implant that tells them and instructs them to do something. But if you're strong in your soul and in your spirit, there's no amount of influence or mind control that is going to do anything. It's going to do what it's been doing to people like us. It's going to give us voices. It's going to help us to call it out, because you can feel the contrast. I mean, I can feel it instantly, and I can work with it and get rid of it, versus if I either thought it was positive or that, the governments and the propaganda coming out of Hollywood was actually beneficial. So I try and shield myself from as much of it as possible, not because I'm not strong enough, because it makes me sick, if anything. But there is, of course, a lot within those organizations that are trying to create change. And that's really, really important. So we can't fully abandon anything. But I mean, as far as the black goo goes, there's organic black goo. And again, everything is an imitation. And when it becomes an imitation, because it's not connected to anything, it could become a weapon. Whereas biological life that's connected with spirit has natural integrity, natural compassion, natural desire for unity consciousness. And it's going along a flow, and also upgrades that help us to stand in a higher frequency of that, which is organic, which is taking place right now, especially as the sun's moved into the 13th sign. But that's also something that people aren't going to naturally attach themselves to, because does any of that information come through the media? All the Essenes and the true Templars got wiped out. All the knowledge of soul alchemy and all the freedom teachings got wiped out. The Emerald Tablets connected to Thoth got perverted and basically rewritten. And all the texts, the ancient texts, have been distorted, by that Anunnaki manipulation that, now work with the Dracos. So people just have to be really strong in themselves. Look at this as a reunion with the true you, and start to divorce yourself. I mean, this is a love story. Our DNA holds everything about Hyros, Gamos, and sacred union. Our initiations have to do with being in that authentic relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with nature. Everything else is an imposter. And I like to just put it down to the simplicity of all. That's something we have ultimate permission to divorce. It's not in alignment with nature. It doesn't flow with nature. It goes against everything in our physical expression. And that's why we begin to become more like robots, because our biological life cannot sustain that frequency. So the artificial component starts to come into place. And only those that are really lost or really disconnected or unconscious are going to fall prey to that. And that's why, it's very important to bring people back to center and to understand that there's cycles in nature that are stepping us up and helping us to initiate. It's not all on us. It's simply about just being in your breath, sitting by a tree, embracing, the Divine Mother and the Christ consciousness, and not necessarily putting them as figures, because then people are reminded of religion and belief systems. But look at it as a natural energetic that exists in your own divine blueprint. And it's obvious it exists in Earth, because everything, look at the web of life and how it functions and the grander intelligence of it all. And on a multidimensional level, it's just like how the human being was created. We've got the benevolent, which is like the immune system. And then we've got the disease, which is like the Dracos and these negative agendas. And what they prey on is the negative ego. So if a person is willing to clear their negative ego and to be humble and a bit more transparent, being okay with the fact that we're all wounded and we all have something that we need to work on, and we don't have to hide behind any facades, all that stuff is going to be a thing of the past. But the programmings are so deeply embedded. They're multi-generational. The DNA damage has been carried thousands of years from generation to generation. But consciousness is going to turn on the DNA. It's going to open our galactic chakras. We don't have to dismantle the technologies. We need to neutralize them and deactivate them. And so the war is won within, and the more each person claims victory in their own right, that'll start to ripple out and help people match that frequency and vibration. And I would say that we're pretty much almost on the other side of that tipping point.
That's a very positive vision and a very inspirational one. We're approaching the 90-minute kind of mark, and I'm just wondering whether there's any subject matters that you had wanted to touch upon here that you hadn't had the opportunity to talk about.
I always have very thorough and very incredible interviews with you, and I always feel so filled to the rim and inspired and so grateful. You brought up a lot of really important information that I needed to hear through you, and I appreciate all that you shared. And yeah, I'm going to be processing it for a while and thinking about it and the next steps that I would like to take and encourage people to take. And really, I think we covered a lot. I think a lot of people might still have questions, maybe terminologies they haven't heard before, but people like you and me make ourselves available to create clarity, to expand our conversations and to keep the dialogue open and alive, to stick with this unity consciousness and this expansion of us, so that it ripples out and everybody can be included, which I feel is happening. So let's all stay tight. Let's all keep up with the harmony amongst each other, and let's do our best with what's to come. I think people will notice that real positive change is on the way. And I just want to thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. And it's been a while since we've had a chance to talk. So This is really wonderful.
It was good. Well, thank you. It's a mutual expansion on my side. I know, and I noticed that you have an ongoing series of online workshops and various things. Would you like to talk about them, or?
I don't have anything necessarily scheduled like as an online workshop. I think I'll be doing something with Portal to Ascension pretty soon. I have a podcast I'm doing after this, but I'll keep posting it. Mostly I just have conferences coming up, but I want to do more online workshops.
Yeah. Now, could you tell people about your websites and how people can get in touch with you? People who, maybe wanting to do that and wanting to get more in touch with your work.
Yes, sure. And I'll be doing a podcast with Patty Greer in another day. I'm LauraEisenhower.com. I'm still trying to get my website up. I know it's been down for quite some time. But if you do want a session, I work with a Galactic Heritage deck. I have the Mother Peace deck, which is a circle deck. I do astrology, soul-centered astrology, and things geared towards these great activations and movement into higher DNA expression and activation of galactic chakras. You can just write me here on Facebook, or my email is Laura, LauraBE4@gmail.com. And you can just set something up with me personally. My website should be up in another week or two. And just I do a lot of posting on social media if you want to keep up with my stuff until my website's up, and that's LauraEisenhower.com.
Great. Well, look, thank you so much for taking this time to be available. We were quite serious about moving this conversation not only inward, which I think is very much part of your mission, because you do that daily in your postings, which are very inspirational to many of us and help us grow, but also outward. And so we're going to be moving forward on the Abrogate This project that is bringing these secret treaties into public consciousness, into the consciousness of public officials such as the President of the United States, who may or may not, we don't know, be aware of the power that he has to abrogate and renegotiate. And he loves to do it with NASA. I mean, I'm up in Canada, and I can tell you that that's subject number one up here. So why not make it subject number one with the Dracos, the Orion Greys, the Anunnaki, and everybody in this galactic neighborhood, as well as in North America, right? Yeah. So
definitely,
we'll keep you posted as we start making more and more thing there. And so if anything comes your way, that there's a groundswell of public support, that you should definitely see. I think of you as the Princess Di of the Greada Treaty, in the same way that Princess Di made the Landmines Treaty happen, and that was part of her mission. So that's my 2 cents. Okay.
Well, I'm totally on board, and we'll definitely stay in touch about it.
Okay, great then. Good enough then, Laura. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alfred. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.